first real event I remember was waking up in the middle of the night being sodomized in my own house. My fear of my father way, way, way exceeded any fear I had of what was happening to me. There was nothing left in me. I mean, I was literally a numb child, and I was numb for years and years and years, and it followed me long, long after those events did. You know, people talked about God as Father. Now, you know, I look back at the priest who was a father and the two priests who were a father, my father, and I say to myself, you know what? That's not a relationship I want any part of.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Jonathan Daugherty, and I'm your host for today's program. Sadly, over the past decade or so, we've been subjected to a continual litany of reports about the sexual abuse of children by Catholic and Episcopal priests and other clergy. And for most people, there is no betrayal of innocence more difficult to fathom. We simply don't want to believe that it's true, and so we turn our eyes away from those who've suffered such unspeakable horror. We tell them it can't be true, or if it is true, that somehow it must be their fault. We minimize and lie to protect our institutions and choose to pretend it isn't happening. Today, however, we're going to look that truth straight in the eye as we hear from a man whose heart and soul were torn to shreds by this most devastating of criminal acts. His name is Tom, and he wants to be heard. He wants you to know what happened to him so that this doesn't keep happening to young children and teenagers, so that the perpetrators are removed from their positions of authority and properly penalized for their crimes. And most of all, he wants you to know what happened to him so that survivors of such abuse can find hope in the power of God to transform great tragedies such as his into something powerful and redemptive. Let's all learn from Tom's example of courage and his continued faith in God.
I think the first memory I have of my father was he accused me of stealing a nickel off my mother's dresser. And my punishment was he gave me a cardboard box, told me to put all my things in it, and he threw me out of the house. I was 5 years old. And I sat on the back steps and cried, seemed like forever, and till my mother let me back in without any, you know, we love you, anything at all like that. The message was, don't make your father angry. And that single event set me up for a lot of events that followed after that. I have virtually no memories of my childhood whatsoever. And every once in a while, a little piece will come back. And a lot of the pieces that come back are all built around abuse and abusive events in my life. The first real event I remember was waking up in the middle of the night being sodomized in my own house, and without anyone willing to protect me or to rescue me. And from that moment on, I knew that my house was not a safe place for me. And I knew that my father and my mother would not protect me. And I knew that I was kind of disposable, so to speak, and that the slightest thing I did wrong could end up with me just being thrown out of the house at any age whatsoever. And if they would do it at 5, they certainly would do it at 10 or 12 or 15. And I grew up one of 5 boys, and I honestly have no memory of whether my brothers were treated the same way or if anything happened to them. It's just a complete blank, that entire period of my childhood. And to get out of the house, I decided that I would kind of follow a family tradition of sorts and become an altar boy. I was raised in a Catholic family, and so I started becoming an altar boy. And in the beginning, it really worked really well, and it was a place where I could go where people seemed to appreciate me, and I was just Tom. And then one day, one of the priests put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Why don't you come with me?" And we walked back into the rectory. And as we walked back into the rectory, I'm thinking, holy cow, I mean, this is just incredible. No one's ever treated me this good. And so we keep walking and we step into a room. And he sits down and he tells me to kneel down in front of him. And he tells me to close my eyes, and he starts to pray for me. And then he tells me to open my eyes. And when I open my eyes, I find that he has exposed himself. And he then proceeds to do to me and have me do to him what predators do to little boys. And it would just, it just was a total, almost a mind destruction in some ways. I had no mental capacity, nothing to process what was happening. This was a man that my parents absolutely trusted beyond the shadow of a doubt. Okay? A man that my mother had times had said, I want you to be like him. I want you to go into the priesthood and be like him. And so this process went on for a long period of time. I can't tell you exactly how long. Until one day we were in that room and another priest walked in. And the two of them essentially ganged up on me and raped me and forced me to perform oral sex on them. And this went on for a considerable period of time. The two of them, if you stop and just think about what happens to a little boy, and a little boy who has no concept of what's really happening to him, who sex is not even a word in his vocabulary at that point, who's interested in playing ball. And you've got all this stuff going on. And it really stops your growth emotionally. It stops any sense of feeling that you have, because over time, as it happened over and over again, I just shut down. And I'd be in that room and all these things would be going on. My mind would be a million miles away somewhere. And when it was over, my mind would come back and I would walk home. I reached a point where I had no tears left. I didn't scream. I didn't react at all. I just did what I was told. There was a time when I tried to rebel and not do it. And the priest went to my mother. And he said, Thomas is just not doing what he's told at church. And that's not good. And so she took me aside, and in no uncertain words, she said to me, you do exactly what you're told at church, and exactly what Father tells you to do, or you're going to have to answer to your dad. And to be honest, my fear of my father way, way, way exceeded any fear I had of what was happening to me. How horrible is that? And so this went on for an extended period of time. Continuing to kind of do things that little kids do and look for places that are safe. I joined the Cub Scouts, and I had a great time in Cub Scouts. And then I grew out of it and grew into Boy Scouts. And I thought that, this is really terrific, because the Boy Scout master was a very close friend of our family's. And I thought, this is going to be another safe place for me, like Cub Scouts was. And it was, until we went on the first camping trip. And on the first camping trip, he called me into his tent, and he told me that I have to go through an initiation. And the initiation, he told me to kneel down in his bed, and I did that. And he told me to drop my pants and my underpants, and I did that. And then he said, I want you to say out loud as you can, oh, what an ass I am. And just say it over and over. And I can just hear myself even today saying that over and over again. And just saying, dear God, the whole world must be like this. And then he stopped me and had me come down by him and masturbate him, massage his penis, so I could find out what a real man looks like. As these events went on and on, I thought that I'd kind of outgrown it. I think they got tired of me. Unfortunately, they probably moved on to other boys. I tried to quit Scouts right away, and I wasn't allowed to. And my parents told me, quitters never win and winners never quit. And I had to stay with it. And so I had to suffer through that for a whole year before I was allowed to quit. I thought it was all over until I walked home from school one day. And I stopped at the train station to use the restroom. And I go in the restroom, and I set my books down, and I step up to the urinal, and I start doing my business, and this man comes in, stands next to me. And I recognized him because he worked in the train station. And the next thing I know, I'm getting ready to zip up my pants and leave, and he reaches over and he puts his hand on the back of my head and proceeds to push my head down and makes me fondle his penis, and then he rubs it on my face. And I had no tears, couldn't scream. I mean, there was nothing left in me. I mean, I was literally a numb child, and I was numb for years and years and years, and it followed me long, long after those events did. The next memory I have is being in my parents' bedroom and sitting on the bed. And there are two other people in the room. And at some point in time, the guy goes behind me, he reaches up, he takes my hands, and he pulls me back on the bed. I thought he was playing. I didn't think anything about it. And she proceeds to pull my pants down and start to fondle me and perform oral sex on me. And ultimately removes her clothes, climbs up on me, and rapes me. I was 12 years old. And this was my beginning of life. And to be honest, this is what I thought was normal. And so when I saw other people, I thought other people were experiencing exactly the same thing that I experienced. And at some point in time, somehow I knew I was different. And I thought, gee, there's something wrong with all those other people. And, you know, they're how they live, there's something wrong with it. And it took me a long time to figure out that it was me and that I was really the one that had all the problems. And I mean, I had nightmares. From the very first event, I had nightmares forever. And I had nightmares until I was in my early 50s. And I was sitting on the bed with my wife and my daughter in Boulder, Colorado, watching the news. And I still get goosebumps when I think about it. They came on and they interviewed a man by the name of Frank Fitzpatrick. And maybe I owe my life to Frank Fitzpatrick because he was the first person that I had ever heard talk about being sexually abused as a man, but being sexually abused by a priest out loud. And he was sexually abused by Father James Porter in the Boston area. And the story of Father James Porter covers a lot of territory because he abused an awful lot of kids. I listened to that interview, and about halfway through it, I looked over to my wife and I said, I understand everything now. I understand the nightmares. I understand I mean, it was like someone flipped a switch and opened the drapes, and I could see how my whole life began and what it was all made of. Up until then, and I don't know how this happens with a kid, but I went through periods where I knew what was happening to me. I went through periods where I went numb and I just completely shut down when any of this stuff was going on. And I went through periods where I knew it had happened to me, and then I just completely blocked it out of my mind. And it did not reemerge until the early 50s. And subsequent to that event, I probably went to 8 or 10 different counselors. Each one of them helped me a little bit, but none of them helped me really heal. I accepted the Lord in 1983, and I couldn't grow, and I couldn't trust God, and I couldn't understand why. But, I mean, there was just no way. You know, people talked about God as Father. Well, you know, I look back at the priest who was a father and the two priests who were a father, my father, and I say to myself, you know what? That's not a relationship I want any part of. And so it was very difficult for me, and I struggled literally for 2 decades. I started into counseling, and I found that it didn't really help me a lot. You talk about it a lot, but there's no way to heal. And I walked into Johnson Ferry Baptist Church one Sunday morning, and I picked up the bulletin, and I opened it up, and it was like there were only a few words in the whole bulletin. And those words said, support group for adult survivors of child sexual abuse. I thought, holy cow, not possible. And I took that bulletin, and I bet I carried it around with me for, I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe longer. And before I got the courage to walk into that room, to this day, I couldn't tell you what I said. But I do know that it's the first time I'd ever openly talked about my experiences of being abused. And when I got up and walked out of that room that night, I felt like I'd lost 150 pounds. I mean, it was just truly amazing. You have a lot of fears as you transition through this life with the abuse. And you have the fear that you're going to be homosexual. You have the fear that you are homosexual. You have the fear that you're really damaged goods and no one will ever want you. You have all these things percolating inside of you, and you try to sort it out. I had a scholarship, an appointment to the United States Naval Academy. I went for 1 year. There just was no way in the whole world. I didn't even understand what had happened to me at the time. There was no way in the whole world I could stay in a place that was 99.9% men, and men had absolute control over me. And I mean, it was just, I almost self-destructed there because I just couldn't be there, so I left. So I think for me, homosexuality was not going to be a reality because I was scared to death of men. And I've even noticed as I've gone through my career that there have been people who would walk into a meeting or a room when I'm an adult, I'm 30, 40, 50 years old, and instantly the hair on the back of my neck would go up, and it would alarm me, and I would never understand why. And only once I started to break my silence, once I got into the support group, and that's when I really started to heal. And when I started working with voice, slowly but surely, I started talking to people. I didn't have a choice. I mean, people would approach me, and I would start talking to people. And I got over some of the early experiences. One of the first experiences I had was at a fundraiser for voice. And I go to this fundraiser, and I'm looking, it's a silent auction, I'm looking at some of these things, and a lady walks up beside me, and she starts talking to me, and we talk about the stuff on the table. And she said, "Gee, how do you know Angela?" And I said, "Well, I met her at the support group at Johnson Ferry for adult survivors of child sexual abuse." You would have thought I told her that I had the Ebola virus. She could not get away. This is a person at a fundraiser for the issue. She could not get away from me fast enough. I took a high school friend. I had a high school friend. She and I have been friends. I'm 68 years old. She and I have been friends maybe 65 years. I mean, we know each other really well. We went through a lot together when we were growing up. I sent her a copy of Angela's book. And in it, I put a letter, and I explained to her the things that happened to me. Her response was to send me a note and say, "I want you to know I burned the letter, and I've sent the book back to you." What a terrible story. And I thought, she's ashamed to have that in her house. She's ashamed for somebody to see it. I struggled a lot with God. I struggled with the whole idea that I could trust anyone, even God. I look back at all the events and all the things that happened to me and the men of God, the people that I should have been able to trust absolutely completely without any hesitation, were so evil that I said, "Are these God's people?" And so I struggled and struggled, and I ended up bargaining a lot with God. You protect me from this moment, and I'll do this for you. And I never got protected from the moment. And all the things continued to happen. And I don't think I really started to trust God until I freed myself from all the guilt and all the shame. And I started looking back, and I said, God didn't do this to me. I have a free will, and I can make choices. Those people have free will. They can make choices, and they made a choice to do things to me. God didn't make that choice for them, and I didn't make that choice for them. And the more I struggled, and at the same time I was struggling with Catholicism, and having been raised a Catholic, and I started to see this earn your way to salvation mentality. And I'm saying, that's really not what this is all about at all. And when I accepted the Lord in '83, I did it with all the sincerity in the world. And I've had wonderful men try to mentor me, and I never felt anything close to like an equal. And until I got into the environment with voice, and I have people around me, maybe for the first time ever in my life, excluding my family, who live their faith, who I can watch model the love of God, and I can watch model using spiritual guidance to make decisions. I mean, it was a real eye-opener for me. And I really don't have any relationship with my brothers at all. And God has replaced them in my life with just an extraordinary group of strong, faithful Christian men and women, including men for me, and that's really a first. And there's a lot of work more to be done in me, and I don't have any hesitation about that at all. But God has done a miracle in me. The fact that I'm here today is a miracle. The fact that I speak openly about this is a miracle. And that's how God has been changing me, one day at a time, one event at a time. And I mean, it's incredible. The people that come around me, the fact that I can use those experiences of my childhood, it's incredible. I mean, I talked to a lady day before yesterday. I got an email from her, and she said, I'm sitting here, I've just finished reading your book, and I'm in absolute tears. You're an inspiration to me to not just survive, but to heal and have victory over what I've been through. How incredible is that? I mean, the goosebumps again. I mean, that's what my life is meant to be. I mean, I've had some real incredible professional experiences. And I mean, I was president of the company that got a drug to market that was a treatment for breast cancer and ovarian cancer when there was nothing. And if our little company hadn't done it, no one would have been able to. I thought that was the piece de resistance of my career until I started doing this. And there's no feeling, you go through that, you get an email like that, and you say, God just reminded you why you do it, and that he knows you're doing it, and he's on your side. I mean, they're just incredible feelings.
Tom's story is not unique. There are millions of men like him who need the power of Jesus Christ in their lives for healing, hope, and a future. Don't be afraid to share Christ with your loved one who is sexually abused, male or female. Yes, they may be angry with God and resist at first, but once they begin to experience His love for them, that anger will be redirected to the true cause of their abuse, and the healing of their relationship with God can begin. Tom describes it best, so let's end the program by letting him tell you what God can do.
My name's Tom Scales. I'm 68 years old, and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And if you're a man out there today, and you've traveled the same path that I have, I know the emotional cave you live in. I know the challenges that you have with intimacy, with friendship, with just normal everyday relationships. I know the guilt and the shame you feel, and I know how self-destructive behaviors just seep into your life on a daily basis. And I'm here to tell you that it does not have to be that way. I'm here to tell you that God has done a miracle in my life. And the first step for me was having the courage to step up and break my silence among people that I could trust. And I encourage you to do the same thing. It's a difficult step for a man to take because in some ways the sexual abuse that you experienced and that I experienced emasculated you in a way. It's so horrific that people don't want to hear it. And in some ways you find out who your true friends are when you actually break your silence. But I ask you to step forward, take that step. It's not possible for me to explain how different my life is today from just 3 or 4 years ago. The joy I have, the true friendships I have, the feeling of love and affection that I can experience that I never experienced before in my life in the first 50 years or so before I broke my silence. These are important steps. No matter how old you are, no matter where you live, no matter what stage of life you're in, no matter whether you're an executive or whether you drive a bus. This is available to all of you, and it's available through the saving grace of Jesus Christ and your willingness to step forward and embrace it.